Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 221, Authentically South African, with Michael Barrett. The music of South Africa is not unlike its people. It is built on layers of complexity, all rich with meaning, and difficult to understand from the outside. Michael Barrett loves his country and its music, and his work proves it. I have long been a fan of Michael Barrett, as well as an admirer of the way that South African people have vigorously pursued social progress in my lifetime. So this episode was a double whammy of excitement for me. In this chat, I sit down with Michael Barrett, a leading voice in South African choral music, to dive into both his personal journey and professional experiences. We explore how his love for music began with his mother, a concert pianist, and his time with the Drakensberg Boys Choir, which paved the way for his academic career at the University of Pretoria. Michael reflects on the importance of hard work and dedication over talent alone, and we discuss the unique challenges facing choral music education in South Africa, from generational shifts to the lingering impact of apartheid. We also dig into the role of cultural integration and music's power to bridge divides, including Michael's experience with arranging African music for choirs and navigating cultural sensitivity. And we even discuss the difference between American cultural sensitivity in this way versus in South Africa. This conversation offers a rich blend of personal stories, insights on choral conducting, and the importance of music in fostering cultural appreciation and unity. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, and then weigh in yourself with your related ideas over at the Facebook page called Choralosophers, or on the choralosophy.substack.com blog space, which now has just cracked over 2,000 subscribers there. You can add your comments any of those places. Also, in the show notes, you're going to find information about Michael, as well as his fundraiser you'll hear him mention later in the episode to help the Tux Camerata get all the way from South Africa to ACDA National next year in Dallas. You'll also find links to the choralosophy.com shop, where you can get my reading rope poster for your classroom, as well as other classroom wall art, t-shirts, hats, and more. Attention event organizers. Ludus is here to take your events to the next level. Imagine a ticketing platform that's not just about tickets. Ludus offers marketing, fundraising, and even volunteer management, all in one place. It's time to streamline your event management process and impress your attendees. Join the Ludus family today and unlock endless possibilities for your events. Go to ludus.com/choralosophy and try it out now, free to you. And if you use that link, you'll get the marketing feature free to your customers as well. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. Underwriting and crucial support for this show comes from listeners themselves who choose to subscribe on Patreon or now on Substack. Subscribers get access to the private podcast feed as well as my Google folder full of goodies and much more. The producers on Patreon are Brian Long, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakacek. All right, everybody. I am here with Michael Barrett. Michael, I think, is joining me from South Africa today. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's nice and dark outside at this very point in time. You still haven't got to the afternoon yet.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Michael is one of my favorite composers and choral arrangers. I just love his music, and my kids do too. We all get excited when a Michael Barrett piece comes up through the rotation. So I'm excited to learn more about that. But first, I would like to learn more just about you. So telling us some of the stories, if you could, self-select, so to speak, of why is it that you do choral music? What gave you that passion? Where did it come from in your life? And then what are you doing now every day for your job? What does a day in the life look like?
So it's a really lovely story. My mother was a concert pianist, and in those days, in the 1960s and 70s, when she grew up, there was no such thing as concert pianists here in South Africa. And especially when she was working, you'd go to work, you'd have children, but you'd have to give up your career when you had children. There wasn't a kind of maternity leave and all these kind of things. And I have 4 wonderful brothers. So we're 5 5 boys, and the response we get to that quite often is my poor mother. And she was my inspiration in music. And from a young age, I would be singing everywhere. And my parents then sent me to a wonderful school here in South Africa called the Drakensberg Boys Choir, which is pretty much equivalent to the Vienna Boys Choir or your old American boy choir, which I know sadly doesn't exist anymore. And there I went to school, and that was pretty much the foundation of everything that I am today, especially musically. And I studied Palestrina and Shosholoza, every day kind of thing. So it was kind of like classical music in the morning and traditional South African music in the afternoon. Studied languages, including Zulu at school. And that's really where my passion and love for music from all types of genres came from a very, very young age. I think my parents sent me to Drakensberg not only because I was singing, but because we were 5 boys in the house. So they tried to get rid of some of us, and there was a pretty good excuse to get rid of me. So I was shipped off to a boarding school very far from my house. And yeah, my passion for music just kind of grew and grew, and it's just kind of always was part of what I wanted to do. And that's the one reason. The other reason is I cannot do anything else. I've tried. I can't do anything else. So I mean, it's music is really, really what inspired me. And after my schooling career, I went to university, and I'm actually studied at the University of South Africa, UNISA, as well as the University of Pretoria. And I sang in the very choir that I'm conducting today, the Tux Camerata. So it's kind of come full circle for me. And it just kind of kept going, and it was really easy for me. I had the support of the family, and in what I wanted to do. They knew I was exceptionally passionate at it, but I was also exceptionally hardworking, which is kind of like my motto to my students. It's really hard work that gets you there. It's not just passion, and it's not just talent. It's really putting your shoulder behind the wheel. And I actually studied opera. That's the strange thing. And I just couldn't find myself locked in a room for hours and hours every day by myself because I like people too much. And so I went into choral conducting, and I sang in the university choir, and pretty much they say the rest is history.
Yeah. Wow. That's exciting. And I especially, I did not know about you that you also sang as a student singer in Tux. That's a very cool full circle as well. I get to teach at the school that I went to as well. So I kind of have a little bit of experience with that. Now, speaking of your position there as the conductor of the Tux Camerata, what else do you do at the school? Is that your entire job, or do you have other responsibilities?
I wish that was my entire job. No, I'm also head of choral conducting. So I'm a senior lecturer here in the Department of Music in our School of the Arts, and I'm in charge of the entire postgrad department. So I have all the postgrad students, all the doctoral students. We have a doctoral program here, and all the master students. We also have 4 choirs here that we have a youth choir, we have the Tux Camerata, we have a UP choral, which is for upper voices, and we have a traditional ensemble, and all of them kind of fall under the choral specialist. I don't run any of them, but I have to oversee them from time to time. We will do joint projects together and things like that. So that's pretty much it. And I have a fantastic colleague who actually studied in your side of the world there in the States, Ran Pina, and he does all the undergrad conducting. Wonderful conductor and a wonderful teacher. So that's pretty much what I do. And I have to attend meetings like most people, which are very boring.
Yeah, of course. Right. So then when you describe the academic environment there, and I know you've done a lot of traveling to the United States as well, and you've done clinics here, et cetera. Would you describe the university environment, the way it's structured in your world? Is that a very similar academic environment to what we would expect here in the United States? Is it more like how it is in the UK or in Europe? Like, how would you describe that for those of us who have never been to South Africa?
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit of both, I think. I think South Africa in with its identity has pretty much taken, our constitution is like this as well. When we created our constitution in the early 1990s, we took the best of everything from Europe, from America, from China, from whatever, and we created a constitution which is probably one of the most liberal constitutions in the world. And I think our university and our education system pretty much works the same way, in the sense that we've tried to create academia based on several kind of factors. So, for example, we have the same DMA system as you do in the States. So you can either do a DPhil or a DMA, which is quite popular, which is not very common in Europe. I mean, in Europe, you don't really kind of get that. It's more research intensive based. The big difference that we have here with regards to our choirs is that our choirs don't fulfill an academic role. In other words, we don't have music students in the choir. This is really, and people always get shocked when they hear this, but
Yeah.
Camerata is made up of music students. They're made up of mainly engineers, doctors, lawyers, some guy who does something with plants. Nobody knows what he does. We call him the plant guy. And we've got a couple of music students. I think we have 5 this year, but out of 82, they're pretty much in the minority. So there's no academic responsibility to sing in the choir. You don't get credit for it. It really is just you come to sing in the choir because you are passionate about singing. So they come because they love to sing. And I think that's really kind of a testament and a difference to how a lot of schools do in the States. I know not all schools are like that, but I mean, if you look at your top performing choirs and academic programs, then they're largely music students that are specializing or conductors or vocalists in their ensembles. And we don't have that. So that's, I think, the big difference.
Now, do you think that's because, and tell me if this is wrong, and for the whole course of this conversation, you're always allowed to tell me if I'm wrong about something, but is that because there aren't as many music jobs that a music student could get? So in other words, do they have the same environment there where people like in the United States could be, all these people could be majoring in music education, for example, because there's tons of music teachers that are needed all across the country. Is there less demand there?
There would definitely be less demand. I mean, it is a much smaller country. But also, I think one of the biggest, not I think, I know one of the biggest reasons is we don't have such a big demand for people studying music. And that's because of our history. Now, if you know about our past, apartheid, I mean, education was blocked for the overwhelming majority. We're talking 90% of the population was not allowed to study. I mean, it was just really for the white minority and the few, suppression of the minority over the majority. And I mean, we've been playing catch up and are still playing catch up. And although strides have been taken here in South Africa to rectify that, we still have generational issues where parents, especially Black parents of students, their children will become teachers, or they'll become doctors or lawyers or engineers. Those are professions that are going to, solidify the family and be able to pay for a huge amount of family members that, I mean, have been without work their entire lives and that. So there's a massive responsibility on the young Black student to make a profession which is worthy in the minds of parents. And music is not one of those. And we see that quite often. I mean, we have a lot of students that want to study music, but their parents just don't want to. And it's not just I have to say, it's not mainly Black students that have that issue. I mean, there are obviously there's always been, is there going to be a life for you, as a musician, are you going to make it, or whatever the case is going to be. But it is predominantly a lot of our Black students. So I think that's one of the main reasons. We don't have the biggest music department. I think including our postgrad students, we probably have 80 students. So, I mean, it's really kind of small, and it's the biggest in the country. So that says something.
Interesting. Yeah. In fact, that's a great segue, because I was going to ask you anyway about some of those social climate issues that are happening in South Africa, and you segued perfectly for me, because I know that as an American, we might watch movies like Invictus, and we hear about apartheid in South Africa in our history class a little bit. Like, we learn a little bit about that, because a lot of times American students will learn about the history of your country, but only in the context of kind of comparing it to ours, because we have some similar parts of our history, but of course the context is very different than what you guys have experienced in your country. So what would an American, people all around the world listen to this show, but mostly Americans. And so you're going to be speaking mostly to Americans here, but what would you say that an American wouldn't know typically about what it's like to be in South Africa right now, but also what it's like compared to the version of the Nelson Mandela side of the story that we always learn about? Like, what's changed, in other words?
A lot has changed. I mean, and fantastically so. I think one of the most important things is that as a nation, as a country, we really have to understand someone like myself, being white and being privileged, born into privilege, pretty much has put me at a huge advantage. And that's something we have to acknowledge every single day, because we deal with this in our diverse environment, that, because of our past and that, people are still ahead. I mean, just unfairly so. I mean, colonialists coming to South Africa and pretty much the cause of apartheid and all the tyranny that we had for many, many years. So the first thing is we really have to acknowledge as a people that we have to work together to make this country better. I think South Africa's the South African people are the most resilient people I've ever met in my entire life. A lot has changed in the sense that education is now available, obviously, to everybody. It's still not as fantastic as we would like. We still have very, very poor areas. South Africa is the most unequal society in the world. That sadly is true. And government is working really, really hard to kind of fix that. But it's a beautiful nation, and the people are so beautiful. And I think one thing that South Africans are very good at is we are exceptionally good at talking about our problems, which I know is not such a I think that's probably one of the things, if I can say this, and please excuse me if I'm wrong, but I find that in the States, people are often too scared to talk about things that really are important. You would rather kind of not say something to offend people. But in South Africa, we don't believe in that. We really say, if there's something bugging us and we believe an injustice is done, or we believe that we are being, done in, and that we talk about it, we sing about it, we fight about it, we argue about it, but we have dialogue, and there's always open dialogue, and it's continuous. And we constantly have to learn from one another. I mean, we have two polarizing ideas, cultures. You've got your European side and you've got your African side. And we are trying to create and navigate an identity that is South African, a middle path where we can say, I mean, yes, I'm a white South African and my parents are from X and Y, but I'm South African because my parents were born in South Africa. I'm South African, and I'm as much South African as anybody else that's living in this beautiful country. So we're trying to navigate and negotiate those or have those conversations, and I think that's where my music plays a pivotal role and has played a pivotal role in so many years, especially here at the University of Pretoria.
Yeah. And I want to get to your music in a second, but I do have at least one other question on this topic, because it fascinates me about something you just said, which is that your view of Americans related to this issue, I do not think was wrong at all. I think you're exactly right. In fact, one of the things that I've experienced doing a podcast for the last 5.5 years is, well, first of all, I will say I would fit in very well as a South African. Let's just say that, because I find that oftentimes in the choral music world, I am the only person willing to have a lot of those hard conversations about the American situation in public, in a long form setting. And a lot of people are afraid of that conversation. And I've had a lot of situations where I will have guests who will drag their feet and then get cold feet and back out because they don't want to have the conversation, especially if it's related to anything social justice related or political.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating, because I've never really had that part of my personality. I think I was born with that part of my personality broken or something, where I just think if it's an important conversation, if everyone says it's important, then we should talk about it. And that's interesting.
I think from what I've experienced, and I mean, I've traveled to the States many, many times. I've really been very privileged to be there, and I love the States. The one thing that I know, and everybody knows, is, well, if you've been to the States several times, it's such a diverse place. I mean,
Yep.
From literally from one side of the street to another side, I'm not even talking state to state or across country. You are such a diverse people. So you've got so many different opinions and different views and different beliefs and different ideas. And that's absolutely fantastic. But what I have found talking to my colleagues is that I found it in the teaching space, and that especially at university levels, you have to be really careful how you word things and how you say things, because you can get into a lot of trouble in the States for the way that you say things. For example, I remember I was I once sent an email to the States. I did a residency there, and the people that hosted me had sent the most wonderful, wonderful email about how absolutely fantastic I was, but really just a really heartfelt email about how the students' lives have been changed, etc., etc. And I'm not saying this to boast, but it has a point. And I replied to the email, and I said that in truth, it's you guys that need to be rewarded and be elevated because you give your students these opportunities. And I said a really, really nice email return. And all the person that happened to read this could see was the word guys in the email. And I got a scathing email back saying how insensitive I was because they were female and they identified as female. And that was really quite telling for me in the sense that if that's all that you read in that, and especially, I mean, in South Africa, the word guys is a colloquial. I mean, we don't mean it in sex and gender in any way. It means male, female, it means everything here.
Yep.
So I think quite a lot of, people are scared of saying things because they're scared of this kind of confrontation and that. I always tell people, we've got, and I say this genuinely with the greatest amount of respect, but we really have serious problems in South Africa. I mean, our poverty is unbelievable. I mean, we've had this load shedding thing for over a decade now, which seems to be getting better, where our power was cut off for up to 18 hours every day because there just wasn't enough. There's not water. I mean, there are kids that don't have 3 meals a day. I mean, we really are struggling with those kind of things. We're working together to justify them. We really don't have time to kind of mince our words or, watch our words to say little colloquials where we actually mean no kind of offense. So often when I travel to the States, the first thing I do is I give a disclaimer. I say, I'm South African. And I might say certain things like guys and that, and I apologize. It's just kind of habit. If I do, I don't mean to. And I might refer to gents as in tenors and basses or ladies as sopranos and altos because that's how we kind of do it here. But I'm trying to get better. I will always now refer to tenors and basses and sopranos and altos. And I understand the reason for it. And of course, I want to be better. That's not the point. But the point is that we try building an understanding here in South Africa that we are different. And it's okay to be different. And we just want to walk over to the other side of the conversation so that we can understand your point of view. I want to give another small little scenario, if I can, which I think is so pertinent and so relevant. In cultures, there are certain ways of doing things, and if you don't understand a way of someone doing something, you might feel offended by it for no reason, by being offended. A perfect example is in my culture. If I get to a door or a lift or something like that, it's just polite for me to hold the door open for a female. That's just kind of how I was taught or whatever the case might be. But in traditional Black culture, it's the other way around. The man always walks before the female. And if you didn't understand the culture, you might think, well, that's kind of rude, or whatever the case might be. But in traditional culture, the man always walks first to make sure that there's no danger on the other side. So that's a polite way of doing things. And I think it's a beautiful story to say how we could be so on the opposite sides, but we could have the same meaning in what we want to do. And I think that's where we're very good at in South Africa. We want to understand what these differences are, and we don't always know, but we have those conversations. And I think that's what's so good about our country and our people.
Yeah, those are really good examples of one of the ways that cultures are ever changing, and also relative in a lot of ways. So one thing Americans are really good at, in my experience, is we tend to believe that our version of morality and justice is the correct one, and that it is also universal across time and across space. Now, part of that is the way that we are so rarely exposed to cultural ideas from outside of the United States, and a lot of that is because of media and entertainment, et cetera. We tend to be exporters of those things, and we rarely import them. And so we tend to we expect other people understand our cultural needs, but we don't really expect to know theirs. And that goes from languages too. My cousins grew up in Geneva, Switzerland, so of course they grew up speaking 2 or 3, sometimes 4 languages. and they would come to the United States to visit me, and they would be very confused as to why I could only speak, one and a half or whatever. And so, yeah, that's always been an issue for Americans. And I think in the example of your guy's example, Midwestern Americans off very frequently, that's where I live, right in the middle of the country. We very frequently use guys as a non-gendered term. It happens
Right.
all the time. Yep, and that's kind of regional also. And so I've had that same exact argument with people. Like, well, why do you think that your version of the word guys is the one that we should use as interpretation all the time? Like, people use it differently all over the place. And I think in your situation too, it's interesting because as a South African, and you probably travel more than the average American does, I'm just guessing. And you also have to live in that almost like binary cultural environment in South Africa. And I know there's multiple, tribes and languages and, that live there in South Africa. But, how would you say your cultural fluency had to be growing up? Was your upbringing very integrated? Was it segregated? How would you describe it when you were a kid? Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. Sheet Music Plus has everything that you might need. And to make it even better, they are running a back-to-school sale all summer long. 10% off of the things that you would need for choir, band, orchestra, your methods classes, etc., to get you set up for a school year of success. But then year-round, there are discounts as well. So make sure you head over to sheetmusicplus.com, throw that into your rotation of places that you use to find your materials for class.
So when I was very, very young, it was still apartheid. I'm only 21, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But obviously, I was born during apartheid in the 1980s, and that was pretty much towards the end of apartheid. But I went to the Drakensberg Boys Choir, and the Drakensberg Boys Choir was multicultural from the beginning. The school refused to segregate. So, there weren't many black kids when I was there, but there were more than in your typical school in that. But I grew up studying Zulu. We had to study Zulu, and I had very good black friends at school and still do. So yes, it was very much for me integrated already, and especially by the time I got to high school. Strangely enough, when I came to university, and probably not strangely enough, when I came, it was really kind of the opposite. The University of Pretoria is one of the oldest universities in the country, and it was built as an Afrikaans university. In other words, the old Dutch, the oppressor, the language of the oppressor. So it took over 115 years to kind of get to the stage now where obviously it's not seen as an Afrikaans university. And a couple of years ago, we had a Fees Must Fall campaign, and a year after that, we had Afrikaans Must Fall. So we've been making all these changes to take away this, institutionalized racism where you can study in Afrikaans, but you can't study in Zulu kind of thing. So, kind of level the playing field wherever we go. So we've been navigating that. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is when I sang in the Tux Camerata, and I'd love to tell the story when people come visit and see our photo wall of every single year of Camerata from 1968 until today. When I sang in the Tux Camerata, there was one black student, and that was the early 2000s. So,
wow.
And now, the Tux Camerata is the most multicultural group that we have here at the university. And that's something that we're really, really proud of. And you see it in our music as well. We don't just perform Western music, we perform traditional South African music and Western music and Baltic music and music from all over. And I think that's really important because, like you said, it makes the world bigger for our students. They need to learn a little bit more about cultures, and we can do that through music largely. And I think that's really wonderful. And the one other thing I just wanted to say is one of the things I get, and obviously we have a lot of American conductors and choirs that come here. And whenever I'm traveling, I say, why don't you bring your choirs to South Africa? And often they say, parents won't let me. It's just too dangerous. And I'm like, where do you get that from? and they say, yeah, no, I mean, the news or the parents just, it's an absolutely mind-bogglingly crazy kind of, it's a beautiful country. And I mean, yes, of course, we've got our issues in that, but I mean, and I say this often, and I say this with the greatest amount of respect, in that we don't have people shooting kids in schools or at universities often, all the time. So what makes our country more dangerous? I mean, of course, we have crime and things like that, but it's no more than your country or Europe or, many other countries that are not in war-torn situations. So it really is a fantastic country with fantastic people. Yes, a lot of poor people, but just because people have less doesn't mean they're bad people.
Yeah.
We have wonderful people here, and I think that's something really important that we want to get across to the world. Come to South Africa; it's really such a nice place.
Well, it's on my bucket list for sure. I would love to get there at some point. That's one of my goals for sure.
Well, you're always welcome, and you can come visit here at the University of Pretoria. And we have such a hub here. Our high school choirs here in Pretoria. Pretoria is the hub for choral singing. We, of course, got Andre van der Merwe in Cape Town and Stellenbosch. But in terms of the amount of concentration of choirs, our high school and primary school choirs and youth choirs here are just in abundance. I mean, I just actually came from a concert. I literally had to leave just as they sang the last song to get here. So that's why I'm in my office.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's very cool. All right. So let's change gears a little bit, because I think the conversation about your music is not all that unrelated to what we've just been talking about, because you do a lot of arrangements of African music. So I would actually like to start there, because I know you have some other things that are original compositions and, stuff like that in your catalog. But when you do, and I've been fascinated about this for years, because I've been doing your arrangements for years. And when you do a piece that you've created, oftentimes on the GIA or Walton publishers here in the US carry a lot of your stuff. And you're choosing, let's say, a folk song or a sacred song from an African culture that I'm assuming you have some knowledge of. What is that process like for you? And where do you get the songs from? And then as source material. And then when you're creating the arrangement, where do you kind of insert Michael Barrett? But and then where do you preserve like the original musical language? I know that's like a wandering question, but that's the thing I've been wondering.
It's probably the most common question that I get. So one thing that I always tell people is that we have to look at Michael Barrett as a South African, not as anything else. I'm a South African. I was born and bred in this country. I studied just as much as I studied Palestrina and Mozart. I studied Michael Morane, I studied Enoch Sontonga, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, Joseph Shabalala, all of them. I mean, it's kind of ingrained in me that when I was learning to sing 6-part motets, I was also dancing and learning how to click in isiXhosa. So basically, part of my education was very, very rich, and my idea of folk melodies was not, Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was Shosholoza, or it was Fiela, or it was Jigala Maweni, or whatever the case might be. So I grew up with these melodies, and we would sing them for years. And because I was so young, that it really made such an impression upon me. Fast forward so many years later and stuff like that. I mean, I'd been doing and singing African music. South African music is a big thing in South Africa. One thing you need to know in South Africa is that we are not protective of our musics in that, not like in the States, where the spiritual is a contentious issue about who may perform and who should perform and who should do all these kind of things. And even more so if you go to New Zealand and Australia, where the Aboriginal or the Maori people's music is kind of guarded by people and by cultures, and that's fine. I mean, I haven't got an issue with that. But in South Africa, because of our past, and this is purely something that I have observed, we are honored when people share of our culture or want to try get an understanding of our culture. For example, you come to South Africa as an American choir and you sing, let's say, Shosholoza, and you sing it completely wrong. The interpretation or the pronunciation is wrong in that. You will be met with the most resounding applause and sincere jubilation for the fact that you took the time to try and understand and learn my culture. Now, you must understand, in South Africa, we have said people that are different must be kept apart. You may not marry each other. You may not live in each other's houses. You may not eat each other's food. You may not even go to the same beaches or the same restaurants. That is what apartheid was. It was complete segregation. And now in our healing process, I'm saying, but let me sing your songs. Let me try and come and start this conversation by singing your music in that. And that is the greatest honor. So we have Afrikaans pieces with Zulu backing, or we have Zulu operas, or we have jazz-inspired Afrikaans, kwaito music, or whatever. There's this constant borrowing of cultures, and it's not this is mine, this is yours. This is, oh wow, this is excellent. Why didn't I think about this? And I think that's such a beauty at the moment. We have this explosion of borrowing of genres and cultures and ideologies to create what I believe is becoming South African identity, because that's what we ultimately are trying to do. We are trying to form an identity which we all share. And music is the front runner of this, specifically choral music, because it has language and because it's done by the majority and because it's our national sport is singing here in South Africa. And that's where my music came in, and it all started with Indodana many years ago. And Indodana is neither a traditional African piece and it's neither a Western piece. It was specifically written for the University of Pretoria so that a conversation could be had between a group of students that was vastly different. It is based on an isiXhosa melody, which was sung by a grandmother to a colleague of mine who wrote the melody down, Ralph Schmidt. Very kind of loose melody, which we, of course, kind of adapted in that. But we tried to honor it in the style of traditional music with its repetition. We added layering. The dissonance in that is obviously borrowed from the Western part, etc., etc. So it's neither traditional nor Western, but something which I really kind of believe is South African music. Later on, of course, and many of my arrangements are like that. There's a new one in Kosi Namantla, which is also pretty much a Western African piece, but then there's some more traditional kind of stuff, especially those that I've written with colleagues like Mbuso Ndlovu and Pumelelo Manyati, and just done 2 new arrangements with Sizwe Mondla. And these conversations and these working has been so wonderful because there's been such a learning experience on both sides. From my experience, being able to write music for choirs that makes it accessible, taking out certain things that might not necessarily work in context, and also in the same time learning from culture and language and how this can be better interpreted, and constantly learning, constantly trying to become a better arranger and obviously a better promoter of South African music. And what's been so beautiful is that the conductors and students and colleagues that I've worked with never thought of sharing their music on such a big stage and the importance of it. And it's becoming such a big thing. And we genuinely have GIA product and Walton Music for supporting the music. I mean, it is safe to say that without the support of GIA, especially Alec Harris and Susan Lebar, the editor, and of course Cameron Lebar, who was the one that brought Indodana and all the others to South Africa, we would not have South African music being performed all over the world. And that has been such a wonderful honor for our music here in South Africa.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I have so many thoughts about what you just said. And one of the things that my first thought is that I wish, like from the bottom of every part of me, that is your description of how that cultural sharing occurs in your country was how it occurred in mine. Because I would make an argument that in the United States, we used to have an attitude like that about our music. In the early 20th century, when the lines were very, very blurry between George Gershwin and jazz and the blues and eventually hillbilly music and country music. And there were some like pretty incredible musical creations that were occurring because of how diverse the United States was and how easily people borrowed music from each other's cultures and just shared it back and forth until it became all of these incredibly world-changing styles of music. That happened in the United States for a good 60, 70 years, maybe even 80 years. And I would, and the sensitivity that you hinted at in the United States for towards that sharing of musical culture has really changed in my lifetime. It's become harder to have the conversation about musical elements being shared by who should sing and who shouldn't sing, and all of that is relatively new for us. And so that's one observation. The other observation is that in part of your story, is that one of the first parts that you explained was that your education and your upbringing was immersed in the music of these cultures, the cultures that you are writing and transcribing. And in the United States, oftentimes we and I'm sure you've come across this. I would imagine that you've seen it because so many of your arrangements are purchased by Americans. But ultimately, the idea that only an American could have, I think, which is that, well, Michael Barrett shouldn't write these because Michael Barrett's skin is white, and that is a weirdly American thing. And I've heard that from many people from many different countries, that like you Americans just like, why are you so obsessed with this stuff? And so I wonder if you have encountered that from American colleagues before, and how do you respond to it?
I have, and well, I mean, it's been a question. It's never been at the forefront of this or of that. But I think when I explained to them this whole situation, that firstly, I am South African, and South African is more than just being English or Afrikaans or Zulu or Xhosa or that. We are a country and a people, and we are very diverse in that. And in the same way, we have black students that are writing Beethoven style music, and that we have white students writing Zulu music and that, and it's really beautiful in that. Just because I mean, do we stop Americans writing music in Latin because
No,
you
of
don't
course
speak
not.
Latin? But that's not your culture and that. So I mean, where do we kind of draw the line in that? And I think it's important to know that every country is different. I'm not going to presume that the spiritual or the argument about the spiritual, it's not really my place to be able. I'm not invested in that enough to be able to say which side is right or which side is wrong.
Of
But I am
course.
invested enough in my own country to be able to say that I've had this conversation with my colleagues, and we are 100% okay with it. We're 150% okay with it. We are absolutely overjoyed that people are borrowing from our cultures and creating new ideas of what we call music. I mean, we find it beautiful. This fusion kind of music is incredible. So I mean, we lean more towards kind of cultural appreciation and promotion rather than any kind of appropriation.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important. Look, I suppose we have to say that there's a huge amount of research that goes into any one of my compositions. It's not just something that I quickly listen down and all the writings are wrong, etc. It's a long process to get to that kind of idea, specifically with regards to the language, the culture, the heritage, what I'm trying to portray. And that is important because I mean, if I'm just going to jot down a melody that I quickly heard somewhere and had all the wrong notes and spellings and things like that, yeah, that would be probably pretty rude. And we would probably frown upon something like that. But we don't do that here. I mean, we really are very sensitive to one another, and we do our research, and I consult with my colleagues and stuff like that when it's a language I don't speak. And yeah, I mean, I think the proof has really largely been in the pudding.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. And I think what you're doing is incredible. I wonder, another thing I've just wondered about your music is how much of the continent of Africa do you explore musically, or do you like to stay to the geographical region that you're the most familiar with?
Yeah, so I literally just stay here in South Africa. I mean, the rest of Africa is as diverse as from here to Europe. I mean, music in the western side is completely different flavor. I mean, if you go up to the north, we're looking at more Arab style music, so it's completely different. But here in the southern region, South African region, Botswana, Namibia, here we've got a similar kind of style. We even share languages across the borders in that. So that music is pretty similar. What makes South Africa unique is that its choral tradition is very strong. And I'm talking more about the Zulu choral tradition. I mean, the Zulus really have this very strong tradition of singing, where some of the other cultures would be more inclined towards their dancing or towards their percussiveness. And that's why it's so nice to write in one of the Nguni languages like isiZulu or Xhosa.
Do you ever write in dancing to your music? I haven't seen that in your catalog, but I'm just wondering if that exists. Do you have like choreographed pieces?
Yes, there would be not so much choreographed, but unless we're creating a specific polyrhythm. So I've done that in the music where, for example, say the feet must have a 3-3-2 pattern or something like that. And that is so that it creates the rhythmical pattern, which is essential to the music, which creates the polyrhythm. That I've done before. And I would always advise, and my advice would be watch Tux Camerata YouTube channel because the music always comes to the video. And this is another important thing. I'm saying it right out there so that all the listeners can hear it. If you perform a South African piece, you are 100% allowed to watch the movements by a choir that you know are a reputable choir for singing that music, and you may copy it down to the T. We are not fussy about things like that. We see that as a compliment. It's not stealing. We don't believe in choreographed moves. Most of the time, we have two main movements, either side to side or forward and backwards. As long as the context stays in mind, why you're singing about the music. So we always are encouraging people to watch our videos. And of course, you can do a simplified version because sometimes we do kind of rhythms that are more complicated for international audiences than that, and that's okay. I mean, often when I teach all over the world, I really simplified the movements in that just so that it's accessible, and it's not about getting it right or getting it wrong. Any culture, any country in the world can get it right with a huge amount of practice. Absolutely. I mean, we have to practice it a lot as well. We've just been doing it for so many years. But we kind of slow it down because it's really more about the dancing and the singing. That takes time, to get that, kind of keep the sustain in the singing while dancing. Because often when choirs start moving, they lose the sound. And I think that's the real trick that we have to work on quite a lot. And I often get people that say African music is easy. Then I always reply and say, you're not doing it right then, because it is a real exercise. It's a real gym exercise in stamina and support and focus. So that's pretty much
it. I agree. I find it to be the same thing for my students when we sing that kind of stuff or attempt to actually. So I have one more cultural question, and then I want to get onto your music that is not arrangements a little bit. I want to talk about some of that. So what would you attribute that South African lack of fussiness to? How would you describe that, where that idea came from in terms of we want you to experience the music of our culture. We want you to try on our culture like a sweater, so to speak. Why? How did that come about in your country? If you could pinpoint it.
I personally think it was 100% Nelson Mandela. I think, and a small example was he came out of prison in 1994 and he said, I forgive. And in 1995, now, I mean, rugby is the biggest sport, or at least it was the biggest sport in the sense that it was the sport of the Afrikaner. I mean, this game called rugby. And and so many people didn't understand Nelson Mandela. I mean, I don't know if you know, but he learned Afrikaans while he was in prison. He learned the language of the oppressor. I mean, who does that? And he knew that in order to heal and mend the rift between two people, he had to understand the culture. This is ultimately what is so Nelson Mandela about everything, and what the visions and the lessons we want to learn is the ultimate one is put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Get to know them, get to understand them. Then only can you have the conversation. And I think he did it so well, and I will never, ever forget it. I was in the Drakensberg Boys Choir, and we sang at the opening of the Rugby World Cup. And in the final game, when South Africa won, now this is what's important about this historical event, if you've watched Invictus or all the movies and that, was South Africa should not have won the Rugby World Cup, not in 1995. It was absolute passion and adrenaline. I mean, he called Francois Pienaar in, the captain at that stage, and he told Francois Pienaar in Afrikaans, you have to win this World Cup for the country. I mean, that kind of pressure to put on an individual. I mean, I get goosebumps when I think about it. And when we won that game against all odds against New Zealand, 15-12 after extra time, whatever the case might be, Nelson Mandela came down wearing a springbok, a rugby, Afrikaans, green kind of top. And that was the day, I believe, that the Afrikaners looked at this black man for those that didn't already believe, that people are all equal, and thought, this man is someone that we could follow and listen to. I think that Nelson Mandela was sent to this earth by the good Lord above, and I believe that he's up in heaven right now, and hopefully he will be proud of us. He's just one of the greatest symbols that we've ever had. And I believe that this kind of sharing and putting yourself in each other's shoes, whether it's music related, whether it's helping someone in your community or whatever the case might be, I believe these are the lessons that have directly come down from a Nelson Mandela. And there are many Nelson Mandelas in our country. Desmond Tutu, we've had Steve Biko, we've had so many in our country, and people in their individual lives doing things that Madiba would have done and how he would have portrayed it. And I believe that's really where the sharing has come from. And it's not all, please don't think that it's all kumbaya and we hold hands and everything is perfect in South Africa. It's not. And by far, we have so many things that we have to work on. And I have conversations with my students all the time where they come to me and they feel that we can do X, Y, and Z better for, the minority groups in the choir, or the this or the that. But I'm always open to listen and to discuss and to have conversations. And I think that's ultimately so powerful, because we have to have a conversation. And that's what Mandela told us.
Yeah, and that's just incredible. And I that's again something I long for here in the United States, that we would be able to have a metaphorical Nelson Mandela moment. Because I think what's, even just the willingness to have the conversation, it's very difficult for us to have the conversation. Like, for example, I've done a lot of episodes on this show related to diversification of music, cultural appropriation, the history of race and racism, lots of it. And I can't even tell folks how many times I've gotten private messages from people who are not white, who will tell me that they can't support what I'm doing in public, but thank you so much for having this conversation. It's just weird. I think it makes people uncomfortable that it's coming from you because of your skin. If we start the conversation from that place, and it sounds like what you're describing in South Africa is that Nelson Mandela set, and tell me again if I think I'm getting this wrong, or if you think I'm getting this wrong, but that Nelson Mandela set an example that the conversation has to include both sides coming to the table and having the conversation. It can't be a one-sided conversation, or else we will not heal.
Yeah, thoughts? Absolutely. And I mean, he also pointed out faults on both sides. He said that the white people need to listen more and the black people need to talk up more. So he really was the one that said, in order for us to heal, we all have to get over our issues, and it's just beautiful how he said it. I mean, we black people need to speak up and white people need to listen more. So the one needs to talk less and the other one needs to talk more, and the one needs to listen more and the other one needs to listen less. So, I mean, it's an example that we're all trying to follow in that. And yeah, I think there's so much good in South Africa, especially this year. I mean, we had wonderful elections in the sense that we now have a more inclusive government, which we've never had before. We've had a lot of corruption and things like that. And the Rand is actually really doing very well, and things are starting to happen. There's a real positive vibe in South Africa, which we haven't had for a long time, because we've had a lot of corruption and political nonsense and that. But we're a resilient people. We have to be. I mean, if we don't, we cry, and we prefer not to cry. We just prefer to sing.
Yeah. That's incredible. Well, and like I said, not all of your music is African inspired. So you do have original compositions. In fact, just this summer, I did your Absalom, My Son, in Kansas City with my semi-pro group, and we just loved it. And the singers of the ensemble were, I think, surprised that they loved it as much as they did, because at first that ensemble is like a 3-day experience. They come together for about 3 days, and and it's singers that don't all know each other. And we started reading through it, and there's in that piece, it's a big sing. I mean, it's a long piece. There's a lot of repetition, and in the rehearsal process, sometimes I've noticed that singers don't understand the value of the repetition at first. They think, this is the same thing over and over and over. But you have this little fugue that happens in there. now I'm blanking on the text that repeats, but there's just this little you probably know.
Yeah, my son.
My yes, yeah,
So
that's it.
so
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
that repetition, it's good that you kind of bring that in. That repetition is a nod to my South African heritage. It's the repetition in African music that we have, and it's the layering technique that we use in any African piece. I mean, African music is just about layering. We don't just always hear it straight away because you, for example, hear the homophonic singing, and then a drum comes in, or then there's dancing, or a shaker, or a soloist. That's all layering. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
The concept of Absalon, my son, which was dedicated to my mom, she was diagnosed with cancer during that time, was the stages of grief that one goes through, in each of the layers, and that represents more hardship and more pain, and kind of the massive section, which is the climax, is real, just crying, and the pain of the journey and of losing my mom in that. So that was really just a really kind of special healing piece. And I'm glad that you say you think it's long, because the original is actually even longer. It's when I performed it originally with Camerata, and you'll hear it on the original Phoenix CD, each of the layers, the 8 layers, come in one at a time, which means the first layer sings it 8 times. So it has this very long kind of build up in that, because it was really kind of an emotional journey. So the original piece is, I think, 10.5 minutes, which I think the published version is 7 minutes. And I'm very understanding of music and repertoire, and making music suitable for concerts and choirs all over the world. And that's why I had discussed it with GIA to shorten it for international audiences. But I mean, it was really a special piece for me at the time, and and thank you for performing it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was so beautiful. And I'm really glad that you explained that just now, because that I now feel very good about my interpretation skills, because that's essentially essentially how I sold the group on why we needed to do those why those repetitions were there. Because the way I essentially explained it was, I explained each repetition as the stages of grief.
Exactly what it is. It's the different stages. So, I mean, it was, first of all, you hear the altars, in a very kind of solo, if God I had died. It's almost unemotional, like somebody's just told you this terrible news. And I remember when I was in that doctor's room, and we didn't know what was wrong with my mother, and they said she had cancer. It's like you go blank, and your heart, your soul protects every part of your body. We are just so unbelievably well created, because if pain was to just take over immediately, I think we'd all have heart attacks all the time. But you can kind of get shielded, so your brain immediately blocks you off. You don't experience the pain as it is. It has to kind of make sense, and that's kind of how the piece is. And you'll hear there's so many unnatural things, like, for example, the B flat and the B natural in the beginning. It's so unnatural. It just doesn't feel right, because it wasn't supposed to feel right. Or the tenor singing in much higher than the altos, and the falsetto. It's because, I mean, it's just so unnatural in the text. Based on Absalom, or King David losing his son Absalom. I think there's nothing worse in this world, or more painful in this world, than losing a child, or nothing more unnatural. I have a little boy, and I mean, like, if he hurts his knee, it hurts me incredibly. I mean, I sometimes wish I'd get over it, but it's just terrible. As being a parent, you know this. And I want to tell you one beautiful story about this piece, if I may. As composers and writers, I mean, I don't do commissions in any kind of way. I exclusively write for the Tux Camerata or any choir that I'm conducting. That's like a real important thing. I only write for my choir, or a choir that I'm working with, because that's where my inspiration comes from. I write for a particular ensemble, and then if the piece does well, it does well. And when I wrote Absalom, my son, it was obviously deeply personal. And I based it on the text of Absalom losing, or David losing his son Absalom. And I remember performing it here in the Museum at one particular concert. And I've always told the students, and I profess, that every concert, if you can just change one person's life, you've done God's work. I mean, that's as simple as that. If you just make somebody heal through a piece, doesn't matter if there's 600 people, only one person, really kind of, you change their life, you've done enough. And I remember us performing this piece, and everywhere we did this piece, there was just a response that I'd never experienced, even for traditional African music, where people really were moved by it. And I remember walking out of the concert venue, and I saw a lady come up to me, and she was bawling. And the minute that I saw her, I remembered her son and I sang together in the university choir. And her youngest son was 10 and he died of leukemia when we sang at the funeral as members of the Tuks Camerata. And when I saw her bawling like that, I didn't know she was in the audience. It immediately made sense to me why she was crying. And she gave me the biggest hug. And she said she hadn't cried for her son in such a long time. And this was such a gift. And I still get so emotional because, ultimately what we want to do is we want the world to be a better place. That's what our music is supposed to be. I mean, we're not filthy rich, and no government is spending billions and billions on choirs or choir music education everywhere in the world. But we do it because we have a responsibility to make this world a bit more bearable, because it can be dark in our own personal lives, politically, or whatever the case might be. I mean, the terrible storms that you've been having now in Florida. I mean, I have so many friends in Florida, and that I cannot think of the devastation and people being displaced from their homes. I mean, the pandemic that is the shootings that you have in the States, your real diverse political kind of situation, and everything else that you're dealing with in your own personal lives. I mean, there needs to be light. We need to create light, and that is our role as choral music educators. And if we can do that, especially at grassroots level, in the youth and in children, then I think there's hope for us at the end of the day.
Wow. That's that's so beautiful, and it's such a great story. And I think a really good way to wrap a bow on the whole conversation related to not just all the social and political things we were talking about earlier, but about why we do this art form in the first place. It is ultimately, if we're not able to see those types of goals that you just outlined, then I wonder why gather a bunch of people in the room to sing together in the first place. If we're not trying to achieve something like that. Just really good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the way out, because this has been a really fun hour, and I know you're getting close to the end of your evening and you would like to go to sleep. So we will wrap this up. But before we go, if you could just tell folks where to find your music, what's the best way to do it? And then also, if you have any exciting upcoming releases or things you're allowed to talk about, this is your chance to plug something.
Well, so thanks for the opportunity. So all our music is available on streaming services, Tuks Camerata. I mean, you could really just find us anywhere. And music is available at GIA Walton Music, as well as Santa Barbara Music Publishers. But GIA is really just kind of promoting all of it. So thanks for that. But really what is exciting and what I'd like to say is that we're coming to the States. And it's the first time we'll come to the States. It's massively expensive for us to travel internationally with South African money and that. But we could not say no, because we've been invited as one of the headline choirs of the American Choral Directors Association, the national conference in Dallas, and we are just super excited to be there. So we will be performing a 100% South African program, and it's not just traditional, it is as diverse as you will imagine. So we're very excited to share our music, and if I may be as bold as saying, we really are trying to get all our students there. We have a campaign to send our students. It's a Go Get Funding campaign, and it ends at the end of October. We've already done so well, and we've been so blessed with all the support that we've got. And if people want to support us, they can, go to our website, tukscamerata.co.za, or they could just go to Go Get Funding. So it's not GoFundMe, ours is different. It's Go Get Funding, and just Google choir, and the first choir that pops up, you'll see is ours, and we would really be so honored if we could support our students. But there's cool pledges as well, because it's not just give us your money. I mean, you could get stuff like, I mean, everybody likes merchandise. You can get a signed autograph from me. You can get a cool Zoom discussion with me if you want. You can get CDs. You can watch our online performance before we leave South Africa. If you can't make it to Dallas for the live conference and that, there really is something for everybody. And I mean, we would appreciate all the support we can possibly get. And for those of you that will be in Dallas, please come and say hi.
That's awesome. I will be there in Dallas, so I'm excited about that. Why don't we do this? Then the people listening will put the link to how to help with your your fundraiser in the show notes so that people can find it there. And then I will also create a video clip of this portion of the conversation so that you guys can share it. And also just kind of gives like a little, hey, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it kind of thing, just to try to help create some vehicles to get the word out about all of these projects.
That'll be wonderful. Every little bit helps, Chris. So we appreciate it tremendously. And I know my students will appreciate it. We have a policy that everybody goes or nobody goes. So we will get everybody there. That is our
That's
goal.
awesome. That's incredible. Well, Michael, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. If you are still listening, that means you're one of the people who are MVPs of the Choralosophy podcast, the people who stick around to the end. Of course, the ways to help are to use the Choralosophy promo code at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, 3minutetheory.com, endeavormusicpublishing.com, graphitepublishing.com, and of course you can join the Patreon. Link is in the show notes. You can also subscribe at Substack and chip in a few dollars a month there. All of those things are great ways to help, and of course like, share, leave comments, be part of the conversation. That's what this is all about. See you guys next time.